When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first appeared over Europe in early 1943, Luftwaffe pilots couldn't stop laughing. The massive American fighter weighed nearly twice as much as a Bf-109, looked like a flying milk bottle, and seemed to violate every principle of fighter design that emphasized lightweight agility. German intelligence reports dismissed it as another overweight American failure that would be easy prey for experienced Luftwaffe pilots. Then, the shooting started. Within months, the flying barn door was killing German aces, escorting bombers deep into the Reich, and destroying ground targets with devastating effectiveness. This is the dark truth about what Germany really thought of the P-47, and how mockery turned to terror. The P-47 Thunderbolt made its combat debut over occupied Europe in April 1943, and Luftwaffe pilots couldn't believe what they were seeing. The massive fighter weighed over 17,000 pounds fully loaded, nearly double the Bf-109's weight, with a bulbous fuselage housing an enormous radial engine. German pilots initially approached encounters with confidence bordering on arrogance, assuming the ungainly American fighter would be helpless against nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs that had dominated European skies since 1939, and early intelligence briefings reinforced this contempt by describing the P-47 as a fuel-hungry brute, unlikely to survive prolonged engagements against Germany's battle-tested interceptors that emphasized the lightweight agility German doctrine considered essential. The nicknames came quickly and cruelly. German pilots called it der Jug, the jug, mocking its milk bottle shape. Others called it die fliegende Scheunentür, the flying barn door, laughing at its wide fuselage and stubby appearance. Luftwaffe aces who'd destroyed dozens of Allied fighters dismissed the P-47 as just another target, assuming American engineers had built an overweight failure that would join the growing list of inferior Allied aircraft that German fighters had systematically destroyed, and this contemptuous attitude created dangerous complacency that would cost German pilots their lives when combat revealed capabilities that appearance completely concealed. The first real engagements shattered German assumptions with brutal efficiency. When Luftwaffe fighters dove on bomber formations expecting easy kills, P-47s dove faster, accelerating past 500 miles per hour in steep dives that German pilots couldn't match without risking structural failure. Bf-109 and FW-190 pilots attempting to pursue diving Thunderbolts discovered that their aircraft would shake violently and threaten to disintegrate at speeds the American fighter achieved routinely, creating tactical situations where German pilots had to break off attacks or risk killing themselves through compression effects that American engineering had already solved through stronger construction. The firepower shocked survivors. 8.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns concentrated in the wings delivered 3,200 rounds per minute of combined fire, devastating weight of fire that shredded German fighters with single bursts. Pilots who survived encounters reported watching wingmen explode from brief P-47 firing passes, and the concentrated firepower proved more lethal than the scattered armament on earlier American fighters, demonstrating that American designers had prioritized overwhelming firepower over elegant weapon placement, creating a philosophy that sacrificed nothing important while gaining everything tactical. But the most disturbing discovery was durability. German pilots scored what should have been killing hits, 20mm cannon strikes that would destroy a Bf-109 instantly, only to watch the Thunderbolt absorb the damage and keep flying. Luftwaffe after-action reports began including frustrated descriptions of riddling P-47s with cannon fire, watching them trail smoke and losing altitude, then seeing the same aircraft return to base and fly again the next day, proving that American engineering had created a fighter that could survive battle damage that would be instantly fatal to any German aircraft. But the technical reality was far worse than first encounters suggested. German technical intelligence obtained detailed information about the P-47's power plant, and the analysis created alarm in Luftwaffe engineering circles. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp produced over 2,000 horsepower, matching or exceeding German engines while being more reliable. But the real shock was the turbo supercharger installation, a sophisticated system that maintained sea-level power output to 30,000 plus feet, where German single-stage superchargers lost effectiveness dramatically, creating altitude performance that made high-altitude interception nearly impossible, because BF-109s and FW-190S were gasping for air at altitudes where Thunderbolts operated with full power. The turbocharger advantage fundamentally altered tactical calculations. Luftwaffe fighters optimized for combat at 20,000 to 25,000 feet suddenly faced an opponent that performed better at 30,000 plus feet and could dive from that altitude at terrifying speeds. German pilots reported that P-47s would loiter above bomber formations at altitudes German interceptors struggled to reach, then dive with such speed and energy that interception was impossible, and the diving attacks delivered devastating firepower before Thunderbolts climbed back to altitude where German fighters couldn't follow effectively, creating combat cycles that German doctrine had no answer for. The diving capability was particularly terrifying. The P-47 could exceed 500 miles per hour in steep dives, speeds where German fighters faced control problems and structural stress that limited their effectiveness. Luftwaffe test pilots who examined captured P-47 components discovered that American engineers had designed the aircraft specifically for high-speed operations, with strengthened control surfaces, robust wing structures, and a design philosophy that prioritized speed and strength over lightweight agility, revealing that Americans had deliberately chosen to build a heavy fighter because they understood that speed and power could defeat agility when properly exploited. The armor protection shocked German analysts. The P-47 carried extensive armor plating protecting the pilot, engine, and critical systems, far more protection than German fighters carried. This explained the frustrating combat reports where German pilots achieved what should have been killing hits only to watch targets escape, and analysis revealed that American designers had accepted weight penalties to ensure pilot survival, creating a philosophy fundamentally different from German emphasis on performance over protection, and the tactical result was that experienced P-47 pilots survived encounters that would kill German pilots in lighter aircraft. The 8.50 caliber armament represented another philosophical difference. German fighters typically carried mixed armament, machine guns and cannons, with limited ammunition. The P-47 carried 8 heavy machine guns with 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 total rounds, allowing sustained fire that German fighters couldn't match, and the concentrated firepower meant that brief firing passes delivered more projectiles than German cannon-armed fighters could deliver in longer bursts, proving that sometimes quantity of fire matters more than individual projectile size when creating reliable kills against combat aircraft. German intelligence understood the specs, but combat tactics made it unstoppable. American P-47 squadrons employed boom and zoom tactics that exploited every advantage the Thunderbolt possessed while avoiding its one weakness, turning radius. Pilots would patrol at high altitude using superior turbo supercharger performance, dive on German fighters with devastating speed, fire a burst from 8.50 caliber guns, then climb back to altitude using energy retention that German fighters couldn't match, creating engagement cycles where Luftwaffe pilots never had opportunities to exploit their superior turning ability because combat never descended into turning fights where German advantages mattered. German fighter doctrine emphasized aggressive close-range combat where superior maneuverability would decide engagements, but P-47s refused to fight on German terms. They dictated engagement parameters through altitude and speed advantages, forcing German pilots into defensive postures where their training and experience became irrelevant because American pilots simply wouldn't enter turning fights, and attempts to force engagement by attacking bomber formations resulted in P-47s diving from above with such speed that German pilots had perhaps 2 seconds of warning before devastating fire shredded their aircraft. The escort mission revolution was strategically devastating. Before the P-47's arrival, daylight bombing raids into Germany were bloodbaths. Unescorted bombers suffered 25% plus loss rates to Luftwaffe interceptors. Once Thunderbolts began flying deep escort missions, loss rates dropped dramatically because German fighters attempting to attack bombers suddenly faced P-47s with altitude advantage, and the tactical calculus changed from attack bombers at will to attack bombers and get killed by escorts, forcing Luftwaffe commanders to accept that daylight interception had become prohibitively expensive when escort fighters possessed performance that made German interception tactics suicidal. The ground attack role added another dimension of terror. P-47s carrying bombs and rockets devastated German logistics, strafing trains, destroying convoys, and attacking armor with 8.50 caliber guns that could penetrate light armor and destroy soft targets. German troops coined the term Jabo, jagged bomber, and learned to fear the distinctive sound of the R2800 radial engine because it meant destruction was seconds away, and the psychological impact of Thunderbolt ground attacks was disproportionate to actual losses because soldiers never knew when attack would come, creating constant fear that reduced morale and combat effectiveness even when P-47s weren't present. The Luftwaffe attempted tactical countermeasures. Fighter units were instructed to avoid diving engagements, maintain altitude discipline, and refuse combat unless holding decisive advantages. But the directives essentially conceded that German fighters couldn't effectively engage P-47s under most circumstances, and pilots understood that their commanders were acknowledging American tactical superiority by ordering them to avoid combat with an opponent that German doctrine insisted shouldn't be effective, creating cognitive dissonance that eroded confidence in German technical and tactical superiority that had been foundational to Luftwaffe identity. By 1944, even Germany's best aces were filing disturbing reports. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer, who scored over 200 victories during the war, reportedly stated that engaging P-47s was frustrating beyond measure. They refuse to fight on our terms, and when they choose to attack, escape is impossible. His testimony reflected the experience of countless German pilots who'd entered the war confident in their aircraft's superiority and their own skill, only to discover that the ungainly American fighter negated both advantages through tactics and performance that German training hadn't prepared them for, and the psychological impact of facing an opponent who controlled engagement parameters was devastating to pilots who'd grown accustomed to dominating Allied fighters. German intelligence reports evolved from dismissive contempt to grudging respect to genuine concern. Early 1943 assessments described the P-47 as unsuitable for sustained fighter operations due to weight and limited maneuverability. By late 1943, reports acknowledged it as a high-speed, high-durability escort fighter requiring extreme caution during engagement. And by 1944, Luftwaffe tactical directives were instructing pilots to avoid P-47 combat unless holding decisive altitude and numerical advantages, essentially admitting that one-on-one engagements with Thunderbolts were too dangerous to risk when German pilot training and aircraft production couldn't replace losses faster than combat consumed them. Combat diaries from German pilots revealed the psychological toll. One BF-109 pilot wrote, "Encountered 8 Thunderbolts at 28,000 feet. They dove on us with impossible speed. My wingman exploded from a single burst. I dove away, but they followed, still accelerating. Only violent maneuvering at treetop levels saved me, and my aircraft was nearly destroyed from the strain. The accounts consistently described feelings of helplessness, situations where German pilots possessed superior aircraft in turning fights, but never got to exploit that advantage, because P-47s attacked from positions where German fighters couldn't respond effectively, and the accumulated experience taught Luftwaffe pilots that survival meant avoiding Thunderbolt encounters rather than seeking combat. Ground forces' perspective was even darker. Wehrmacht soldiers dreaded P-47 ground attacks more than fighter bombers they'd faced previously. The 8.50 caliber guns could destroy entire convoys in single strafing runs, and the psychological impact of watching locomotives explode, trucks disintegrate, and soldiers torn apart by concentrated machine gun fire created terror that transcended rational threat assessment, and German troops learned that P-47 engine sounds meant immediate dispersal or death, creating tactical paralysis where fear of air attack reduced movement and operational effectiveness even when aircraft weren't present. Captured German documents revealed the strategic desperation. Luftwaffe High Command circulated internal assessments acknowledging that the P-47 represented a fundamental shift in air warfare philosophy that German industry couldn't counter. American willingness to accept weight penalties for survivability, firepower, and performance at specific altitudes demonstrated industrial confidence that Germany lacked, confidence that allowed building specialized aircraft optimized for specific missions, rather than compromised designs that tried to excel at everything and excelled at nothing. The recognition was spreading that mockery had been catastrophically wrong. By war's end, the P-47 Thunderbolt had destroyed over 7,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat, more than any other Allied fighter type. The statistics told only part of the story. The strategic impact exceeded kill numbers because the Thunderbolt had forced fundamental changes in Luftwaffe doctrine, tactics, and psychology that affected every German pilot regardless of whether they'd personally encountered P-47s, creating systemic degradation of German air combat effectiveness that contributed to Allied air superiority as much as direct combat victories. The bomber escort mission's success was strategically decisive. By mid-1944, American heavy bombers were ranging across Germany with acceptable loss rates, systematically destroying industrial capacity, oil production, and transportation networks. The Luftwaffe had failed to prevent this strategic bombing campaign, despite possessing fighters that could theoretically intercept bombers effectively, and the failure stemmed directly from P-47 escorts that made bomber interception prohibitively expensive, forcing German fighters to choose between attacking bombers and dying to escorts or avoiding combat and allowing bombers to destroy Germany's war-making capacity unopposed. The ground attack role devastated German logistics and morale. P-47As destroyed thousands of locomotives, tens of thousands of vehicles, and countless supply convoys. But the psychological impact exceeded material destruction. German ground forces learned that daylight movement invited destruction from aircraft they couldn't effectively counter, forcing nighttime operations that reduced efficiency and created logistical bottlenecks that hampered defensive operations during critical phases of the war, and the operational paralysis that P-47 ground attacks created contributed to German defeat as much as direct combat losses. German veterans' post-war accounts consistently acknowledged the P-47's impact with mixture of respect and frustration. They recognized that American designers had created a fighter optimized for specific missions rather than general air superiority, and that specialization had proven more effective than German emphasis on balanced performance. The Thunderbolt demonstrated that accepting weaknesses in some areas to achieve dominance in critical areas produced better combat results than achieving adequate performance across all parameters, and this lesson influenced post-war fighter design philosophy, where specialization became acceptable when missions required specific capabilities. The final dark truth was recognition that the flying barn door had been strategically perfect for the war America was fighting. Germany needed lightweight fighters for short-range defensive operations over their own territory, where ground control could direct them to targets and fuel range wasn't critical, while America needed long-range fighters that could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and survive the extended missions that strategic bombing required. And the P-47's weight, which Germans mocked, was actually the physical manifestation of design choices that made it perfect for missions German fighters couldn't perform, proving that mockery based on different requirements rather than objective capability assessment is strategically dangerous. The P-47 Thunderbolt transformed from laughingstock to nightmare in German eyes, proof that mockery based on appearance rather than capability is fatal in warfare. The flying barn door killed thousands of Luftwaffe pilots, destroyed German logistics, and forced tactical doctrines to evolve defensively. Germany learned too late that the Jug's power, speed, and durability defeated elegance and agility. Watch the next video on vintage planes for more untold stories.